While Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi concluded his brief but very significant UAE visit.
India's relationship with the United Arab Emirates has undergone a makeover in the last few years under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi.
I think Prime Minister Modi, when he became Prime Minister in 2014, recognized the importance of the Gulf.
भारत और यूएई की दोस्ती हमारी साझा दौलत है। हकीकत में हम अच्छे भविष्य की बेहतरीन शुरुआत कर रहे हैं।
Welcome, this is Najma Minhas. The Abu Dhabi Crown Prince recently made a historic visit to India, where the two countries signed 5 more agreements under the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement that they initially signed in 2022. Now, these growing economic connections are fueling stronger political and strategic bonds between the two nations. They're quickly gaining momentum as well. In my last vlog, I talked about the details of the agreements and how these ties benefit India in particular. Now, I will put a link into that into the description. But this relatively recent closeness is making a few of India's neighbors nervous. 4 countries in particular. Now, starting with the obvious one, Pakistan. Pakistan and the United Arab Emirates has had a long, close relationship, both diplomatically and economically. Pakistan was one of the first countries to recognize the UAE back in 1971, and it's played a major role in helping to set up the Emirates, for example, now a globally recognized airline. Yep, the same airline that you've probably flown on. Pakistan's military has also trained the UAE's armed forces starting in the 1970s, especially in ground operations and air force development. However, in recent years, the UAE has leaned more on countries like the United States and France for support with advanced military technology areas. These are areas which Pakistan doesn't have access in the same way. In the 1970s, when the UAE was still finding its feet, a small country, Pakistani workers, along with other South Asians, were some of the first to go there and help build the infrastructure. Back then, other countries weren't really jumping at the chance to invest in this small nation in the Middle East. Their contributions helped to build much of UAE's modern infrastructure. But now the dynamic has shifted. Pakistan's challenge is that it's become more of a net taker in its relationship with the United Arab Emirates and is no longer a giver, relying heavily on the remittances and aid rather than contributing equally. Now, this shift in the power balance has strained ties, and historical bonds based on a shared religion are no longer enough to maintain a strong relationship. Increasingly, the question for Pakistan becomes what it brings to the table. And here's where the growing UAE-India nexus relationship starts to worry Pakistan. In the last couple of decades, Pakistan has relied on its connections and importance with the Gulf nations for financial and political backing. But as India and the UAE grow closer, Pakistan's influence in the region is fading. India and the UAE are really stepping up their game together, from holding joint military exercises to working on maritime security, along with all the economic cooperation that they're doing. Now, in the future, this relationship is likely to become even stronger, given the signing that they've done of the I2U2 Security Pact, as well as the IMEC Economic Corridor. For Pakistan, this shift is concerning, especially on issues that it sees as being critical, like Kashmir. The UAE's support for Pakistan on Kashmir has lessened, largely due to its growing economic and strategic ties with India. When India revoked Article 370 in August 2019, stripping Kashmir of its special status, Pakistan was probably pretty shocked by the UAE's reaction. Instead of siding with Pakistan, the UAE took a more diplomatic, some may say pragmatic approach and called it an internal matter for India.
Some breaking news now. The United Arab Emirates has also taken note of Indian government's decision to repeal Article 370 in Kashmir. Praising the move, the UAE has said that his country expects that the changes would improve the social justice, and has gone on to say that the changes will improve security, confidence of the people in the local governance.
The UAE's ambassador to India at the time, Dr. Ahmed Al-Banna, even said that the decision could improve economic and social stability in Kashmir. This was a noticeable departure from the UAE's earlier, much more pro-Pakistan stance on the issue. Now, this lack of closeness is also being reflected on the economic front. Pakistan has been turning to the UAE for financial help since the 1980s. But in the past decade and a half, the amounts they've been asking for have significantly increased. Back in 2008, Pakistan requested around 300 million from the UAE to help it through a financial crisis at that time. Fast forward to 2013, and that figure jumped to $1.5 billion. And by 2019, Pakistan faced a foreign exchange reserves crisis, and the request skyrocketed to $3 billion, which was placed in the State Bank of Pakistan as a deposit. In more recent years, though, the UAE has taken a different approach. Instead of giving direct loans or grants the way it used to, it's now becoming very hesitant to do that. It doesn't want to give direct financial support any longer, and they've made it clear that any help would be conditional on IMF assistance and agreement. They've shown a preference as well for investing in projects rather than giving direct financial aid. Now, this shift reflects a broader trend in the UAE's financial strategy when it comes to how it supports countries like Pakistan. Egypt has seen something similar as well. Now, even foreign direct investment in Pakistan from the UAE has dramatically fallen to around $180 million in 2023. This is a severe drop from the high point, which in the mid-2000s, it used to be close to $1 billion. And if you compare this with $3.4 billion that the UAE invested in India, you can see how much the relationship has changed between the two countries. Now, this fallout may also hit millions of Pakistanis who work in the UAE, 1.8 million to be exact. They send back significant remittances, close to $4 billion in 2023, which are critical for Pakistan's economy. The UAE's closer ties with India directly affects the Pakistani economy and its ability to export labour to regional countries, which it sorely needs to boost the dire foreign reserves issues that it has constantly. In the past 1 year, there's been stories that suggest that the UAE may have in fact temporarily suspended labour visas for certain categories of Pakistani workers, such as especially the unskilled labour, for whom UAE itself is a top destination that they like to go to. However, in recent years, the UAE has started to prefer Indian labour more and more. This shift is due to several factors, but the growing India-UAE relationship definitely plays a big part. As the ties between the two countries deepen, it's clear that India is gaining favour in terms of labour recruitment, which could have significant long-term effects on Pakistan. I'd like to ask you, what do you think is driving this shift? Do you believe it's purely economic, or do you think it's something else? Do let me know in the comments as well. Now, coming to the second country, Iran. Historically, Iran and India have maintained strong ties. But post the Islamic Revolution, Iran's relationship with the GCC countries, including the UAE, has been pretty tense. Iran sees the GCC countries as competitors for regional influence, particularly in the Gulf and the Indian Ocean. So it's not thrilled about India, a strategic partner as such, getting closer to one of its rivals. A lot of this tension stems from that Sunni-Shia divide, which fuels the competition for influence in the Middle East and which has played out in conflicts like Yemen, Syria and Iraq, where the two sides back opposing factions. The UAE was one of the most active military players in the Yemen war from 2015 to 2019 and deployed thousands of troops and provided air support against the Houthis, who were being supported by the Iranians. Another point of tension is the long-standing territorial dispute between Iran and the UAE over 3 islands in the Persian Gulf: the Greater Tun, the Lesser Tun and the Abu Musa. Now, these islands are strategically located near the Strait of Hormuz, where the vast majority of world international trade goes through. Iran took control of them in 1971, just before the UAE's formation, and has held on to them ever since, despite the UAE's claims of sovereignty. Now, this has been a constant source of friction between the two countries. On top of that, the UAE's close relationship with the United States only adds to Iran's frustrations. The UAE, as a key ally of the US Fifth Fleet, is invested in maintaining security and free passage through the Straits, which Iran has threatened to block during conflicts. Iran sees India's deepening defense and strategic ties with the UAE as part of a larger shift in the region that leaves Iran more diplomatically and strategically isolated. Economically as well, India has strong ties with Iran, especially in the energy sector. India used to be a major importer of Iranian oil before the United States sanctions kicked in. And despite those sanctions, India has tried to keep the oil flowing through waivers that is asked from the United States. The trade between the two countries, even given these sanctions, is still last year was $1.8 billion. With the UAE and India partnership growing stronger, Iran is worried that India might start moving its energy source away from the country and more towards the UAE, cutting off a crucial economic lifeline for Iran. India and Iran have also been working together to develop Chabahar port in southeastern Iran. With India has already invested around $120 million in the project, and it's expected to cost a total of $1 billion.
IPGL will invest around $120 million in Chabahar. We're talking about new equipment like reed stackers, forklifts, unloaders, basically things you need to run a major port. India is also extending some loans to Iran, loans worth $250 million. This money will be spent on projects near Chabahar, maybe roads or railways.
The port is a key for India's access to Afghanistan and Central Asia and will bypass Pakistan. But as India gets more involved with the UAE, there is a concern that India's focus should shift away from Chabahar and towards the other projects like the India-Middle East Economic Corridor, which could complicate India-Iran relations. Okay, so now before we get into China's concerns, don't forget to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown so far. Your support helps the channel to grow. Now let's talk about the real heavyweight in the region, China. It's got strong ties with both India and the UAE, but they're probably keeping a very close eye on how this partnership develops. Why? Okay, because it could be seen as a regional alignment that threatens Chinese influence in the Indian Ocean and the Middle East. The United States is clearly trying to contain China, pushing forward initiatives like the I2U2, the IMEC, and even offering major defense deals to Saudi Arabia. That's in the offing. All of this is in the hopes of cutting off China's influence in the region. So as the UAE grows closer to India, China may start worrying about a potential counterbalance to its Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI, which the UAE currently is a major player and acts as a crucial logistical hub in the Middle East. China's already poured around $1.6 billion into the Khalifa port, and the COSCO shipping port started operating there in 2018, and this made it a key link for Chinese trade in the region. On top of that, Chinese tech giants like Huawei are heavily involved in building 5G infrastructure and pushing forward digital transformation across the Middle East, with the UAE acting as a regional key hub again. But China is starting to feel the heat from India's growing role in the region, especially given India's strong relationship with the United States. The IMEC corridor, which is being backed by the United States, poses a direct threat to China's plans and investments in the Middle East, especially since India has been very vocal in its criticism of the BRI.
This mega economic corridor isn't merely an endeavor. It's an assertion, a bold declaration, bigger than the historic silk and spice routes. Perhaps more significantly, a challenge to China's ambitious infrastructure juggernaut, the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, something that entrapped poorer nations in a cycle of debt.
India's closer ties with the UAE, combined with its strategic partnership with the United States, is being understood by China as a move to counter its rise. If India and the UAE work more closely with other partners like the US and Israel on security and economic issues, this most likely will further undermine China's influence in the region, which is what the United States wants. As of 2023, UAE and Chinese trade hit around $95 billion, and they're aiming to make it $200 billion by 2030. And we know that the Indians are hoping to make it to $100 billion by 2030 as well. But with India possibly strengthening its energy partnership with the UAE, China could face some tough questions about its own access to energy resources, especially if global competition ramps up and countries start realigning themselves or aligning themselves into different blocs. If geopolitical tensions continue to rise, China would be worried about how much energy it can reliably secure from the Gulf, including the UAE. China's imported around $34 billion last year in oil imports from the UAE. Now let's talk about Turkey, which isn't thrilled about the growing UAE-India relationship either. Under President Erdogan, Turkey has been trying to position itself as a key player in the Muslim world, often clashing with the Gulf states like the UAE. Turkey's involvement in the Middle Eastern conflicts and its opposition to regimes that have been supported by the UAE, for example, like Egypt's President Sisi's government, has created a natural rivalry between the two countries. So seeing India standing strong with the UAE definitely doesn't sit well with Turkey, as it boosts the UAE global and regional influence. Now, Turkey also has a tricky relationship with India currently. A major issue between them has been Kashmir, of all things. Erdogan has consistently backed Pakistan on Kashmir, and particularly after India's Article 370 revocation in 2019, it called for international intervention.
We maintain our stance in favor of solving the ongoing problem in Kashmir for 74 years through dialogue between the parties and within the framework of relevant United Nations resolutions.
Now, this has not gone down well with India, which views it as interference in its domestic affairs. In response, India has cut back its engagement with Turkey. At the time in 2019 and 2020, it cancelled significant meetings, even defense deals with Turkey, including one on naval shipbuilding. So yes, the neighborhood is not at all happy at these growing ties, and they have concerns which come from political rivalries, economic competition, and changing alliances in a very interconnected region. The growing partnership between India and the UAE, with a focus especially on defense and energy and technology, is set to shift the balance of power, not just in the Middle East and South Asia, but on a global scale as well. I'd like to hear what your thoughts are about this growing UAE-India alliance. Do you agree that these countries have reason to be concerned? Or do you think that this partnership will actually stabilize the region? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do share them with me.